The invitation arrived on cream-colored paper, sealed with the royal crest that had graced 1,000 headlines. But this wasn't just another charity gala or ribbon-cutting ceremony. This was different. Prince William and Catherine, the Princess of Wales, were hosting an event that would bring together the most influential names in entertainment, philanthropy, and global leadership under one roof. What started as a simple evening to celebrate mental health awareness would become a night that changed everything. Behind the palace walls, conversations would unfold that hadn't happened in decades. Rivalries would be set aside, unlikely friendships would bloom, and secrets would be shared that the world would never know. Some guests arrived seeking publicity, others came out of genuine respect for the cause, and a few had personal reasons that ran deeper than anyone could imagine. As the sun set over London, luxury cars began arriving at Kensington Palace. Each passenger carried their own story, their own struggles, and their own reasons for being there. What they didn't know was that by the end of the evening, their lives would be forever intertwined in ways none of them could have predicted. This is the story of that extraordinary night, told through the eyes of those who lived it, felt it, and were changed by it forever. Emma Thompson stepped out of her car at exactly 7:15, fashionably late as always, but not disrespectfully so. The veteran actress had attended dozens of royal events over her career, but something felt different about this evening. Perhaps it was the way Prince William had personally called her, his voice carrying a weight she hadn't heard before when he explained the importance of tonight's gathering. The cause was mental health awareness, a topic close to William's heart since his mother's struggles and his own journey through grief. But Emma knew there was more to this evening than the official program suggested. The guest list alone told a story of careful planning and deeper purpose. As she walked up the steps of Kensington Palace, Emma noticed the photographers were fewer than usual. This wasn't meant to be a media spectacle. The royal family had specifically requested a more intimate gathering, allowing for genuine conversations rather than photo opportunities. Inside the grand entrance hall, Emma was greeted by Catherine, who looked radiant in a deep blue dress that seemed to capture the evening light. They had met several times before, but tonight Catherine's warmth felt more personal, more urgent. "Emma, thank you so much for coming," Catherine said, her voice carrying genuine emotion. "William and I have been looking forward to this conversation for months." Before Emma could respond, she heard a familiar laugh echoing from the reception room. Hugh Jackman was already inside, deep in conversation with what appeared to be a small group of fellow actors. His presence made sense given his own advocacy work in mental health, but Emma was surprised to see him looking so serious, so focused. The next arrival caused a small stir among the gathered guests. Oprah Winfrey entered with her characteristic grace, but those who knew her well could see something different in her demeanor. She moved through the room with purpose, embracing old friends but keeping her conversations brief. She was here for business, not pleasure. Ryan Reynolds followed shortly after, his usual humor subdued. He had flown in from Vancouver specifically for this event, leaving behind a film production that was already behind schedule. His commitment to being here spoke volumes about the evening's true significance. As more guests arrived, patterns began to emerge. These weren't just celebrities attending a royal function. Many had personal connections to mental health advocacy. Some had struggled publicly with their own challenges. Others had lost friends or family members to suicide or mental illness. Tom Holland entered quietly, still young enough to feel slightly overwhelmed by the grandeur of the palace and the caliber of the other guests. But his Spider-Man success had given him a platform he was still learning to use responsibly, and he had specifically requested to be included in tonight's discussions. The surprise guest of the evening was Dr. Sarah Chun, a leading neuroscientist from Cambridge whose research on depression and anxiety had revolutionized treatment approaches worldwide. She wasn't a celebrity in the traditional sense, but her work had touched the lives of millions. Her presence signaled that tonight would involve serious discussion alongside the social elements. Prince William moved through the crowd with ease, but those watching closely could see the intensity in his eyes. He stopped for meaningful conversations rather than quick pleasantries. With Hugh Jackman, he discussed the Actors Foundation work in Australia. With Oprah, he spoke quietly about trauma-informed care. Each interaction seemed purposeful, building towards something larger. Catherine played the perfect hostess, ensuring everyone felt welcomed while subtly guiding conversations toward deeper topics. She had spent weeks preparing for this evening, studying each guest's background and areas of expertise. This wasn't just about gathering famous names. It was about bringing together the right voices for a specific mission. The evening's first formal moment came when William called for everyone's attention. The conversations quieted, and the assembled guests turned toward their host. The room held an energy that was both expectant and slightly nervous. "Thank you all for being here tonight," William began, his voice carrying the authority of his position, but also the vulnerability of someone who had personal experience with the evening's topic. "Each of you is invited because of your unique perspective on mental health, whether through your public advocacy, your personal journey, or your professional expertise." He paused, looking around the room at faces that represented decades of entertainment, activism, and influence. "What we discuss tonight will remain private, but what we plan together could change how the world approaches mental health care." The weight of his words settled over the group. This wasn't just a charity event or awareness campaign. This was the beginning of something much larger, something that would require the combined influence and resources of everyone in the room. Emma Thompson found herself standing next to Oprah, both women sensing the gravity of the moment. They exchanged a meaningful glance, years of experience in both entertainment and advocacy allowing them to communicate without words. Whatever was coming next would require all of their collective wisdom and influence. As William continued speaking, outlining his vision for a global initiative that would combine celebrity influence with cutting-edge research and policy change, the guests began to understand why they had really been invited. This wasn't about lending their names to another campaign. This was about dedicating the next phase of their careers to a cause that could genuinely save lives. The formal reception area gradually gave way to smaller, more intimate spaces throughout the palace. Catherine had carefully planned the evening's flow to encourage both large group discussions and private conversations. She knew that some of the most important work would happen in quiet corners, between individuals who might never have spoken otherwise. Dr. Chun found herself in deep conversation with Ryan Reynolds about his own anxiety struggles and how they had affected his work. His openness surprised her, but it also gave her insights into how her research might be communicated more effectively to broader audiences. Meanwhile, Tom Holland was learning from Hugh Jackman about the responsibilities that came with using celebrity status for advocacy. The older actor shared stories of both successes and failures, preparing the younger man for the complexities ahead. As the evening progressed, it became clear that everyone present had their own relationship with mental health challenges. Some struggles were public knowledge, others were being shared for the first time. The palace walls seemed to create a safe space where vulnerability was not just accepted, but necessary. The first part of the evening concluded with small groups forming naturally around different aspects of the planned initiative. Some focused on research funding, others on public awareness campaigns, and still others on policy change and government advocacy. But underneath all the planning and strategizing was a shared understanding that this evening marked a turning point. These weren't just celebrities anymore. They were architects of a movement that could genuinely change the world approach to mental health care. As they moved toward dinner, each guest carried with them a new sense of purpose and responsibility. The real work was just beginning, but the foundation had been laid for something extraordinary. The state dining room at Kensington Palace had been transformed for the evening. Instead of one long, formal table, Catherine had arranged several smaller round tables, each seating 8 guests. The intimate setting was deliberate, designed to encourage personal conversations while maintaining the elegance expected of a royal dinner. Emma Thompson found herself seated between Dr. Sarah Chun and a quiet man she hadn't initially recognized. He introduced himself simply as Marcus, and It wasn't until later in the conversation that she learned he was Marcus Williams, a former professional footballer whose career had ended abruptly due to severe depression. His journey from the heights of athletic success to the depths of mental illness, and eventually to becoming an advocate for athlete mental health, was one of the most powerful stories she had ever heard. At the adjacent table, Oprah was engaged in an intense discussion with Prince William about trauma-informed policymaking. Her experience interviewing thousands of people about their deepest struggles had given her insights that even professional therapists envied. William listened intently, taking notes on a small pad he had discreetly placed beside his dinner plate. The conversation at Ryan Reynolds' table had taken an unexpected turn. Seated next to a young woman named Jessica who worked with suicide prevention hotlines, he found himself sharing details about his anxiety that he had never discussed publicly. The anonymity of Jessica's work meant she could share statistics and stories that brought the evening's mission into sharp focus. Last week alone, we had over 300 calls, Jessica was saying, her voice quiet but steady. Most were from people who felt they had nowhere else to turn. But here's what struck me most. 40% of those callers mentioned seeing something a celebrity had posted about mental health that made them feel less alone. Ryan absorbed this information silently. He had always been careful about what he shared on social media, using humor to deflect from deeper issues. But Jessica's words made him realize the responsibility that came with his platform extended far beyond entertainment. Tom Holland was having his own revelatory moment at a table anchored by Hugh Jackman and Dr. Chun. The conversation had turned to the unique pressures faced by young actors, particularly those thrust into global fame before their brains had fully developed. Dr. Chun was explaining the neurological impacts of stress and constant public scrutiny on developing minds. The prefrontal cortex doesn't fully mature until around age 25, she was saying. When young people experience intense pressure and scrutiny during these critical developmental years, it can have lasting impacts on their ability to regulate emotions and manage stress. Tom realized she was describing his exact situation. He had become Spider-Man at 19, and the pressure had been overwhelming at times. But he had always assumed his struggles were personal failures rather than predictable responses to an abnormal situation. Catherine moved gracefully between tables, not as a hostess checking on guests, but as someone genuinely invested in each conversation. At Oprah's table, she shared insights from her own work with early childhood development. At Ryan's table, she discussed the research she had been conducting privately on postpartum mental health and its broader implications. Her contributions weren't those of a royal figure making polite conversation. Catherine had clearly spent significant time studying these issues, and her questions were probing and informed. She asked Dr. Chun about the latest research on neuroplasticity. She challenged Marcus on how sports culture could be fundamentally changed. She pushed Oprah to consider policy implications of trauma research. The evening's first major revelation came from an unexpected source. Sir David Attenborough, who had been quietly observing much of the conversation, suddenly spoke up during a lull in discussion. "I've never spoken about this publicly," he said, his distinctive voice carrying across multiple tables, "but I've struggled with episodes of severe depression throughout my career. The isolation required for nature filming, combined with witnessing environmental destruction firsthand, created periods of despair that nearly ended my work several times." The room fell silent. Here was a man beloved by millions, whose voice had narrated the natural world for generations, revealing a struggle that no one had suspected. His vulnerability opened a floodgate of similar revelations. Emma Thompson spoke next, sharing how her own battles with depression had influenced her choice of roles and her approach to storytelling. She had used her platform to normalize conversations about mental health without ever explicitly discussing her personal experience. Hugh Jackman followed, talking about the pressure he had felt to maintain a positive public image while struggling with anxiety and panic attacks. The contrast between his public persona and private struggles highlighted the impossible standards often placed on public figures. But Perhaps the most powerful moment came when Catherine herself shared her experience with postpartum depression after the birth of her third child. Speaking with clinical precision about symptoms and treatment, while also conveying the emotional impact on her family life, she demonstrated the evening's central message. Mental health challenges could affect anyone, regardless of circumstances. Prince William watched his wife with obvious admiration and support. When she finished speaking, he added his own perspective as both a supporter and someone who had experienced his own mental health challenges following his military service and his mother's death. The conversation naturally evolved into discussion of solutions. Dr. Chun presented research on the most effective interventions, while Oprah shared insights from her decades of interviewing people about their healing journeys. Marcus talked about practical approaches that had worked in sports settings. Jessica, the suicide prevention counselor, brought a grassroots perspective that grounded the high-level discussion in real-world application. Her stories of individual callers reminded everyone that behind statistics were actual people whose lives hung in the balance. As the main course was cleared, William stood to address the group formally. But this wasn't a prepared speech. It was a heartfelt explanation of why this particular gathering mattered so much to him personally. My mother struggled with mental health challenges in a very public way, he began. The scrutiny she faced, the lack of understanding and support contributed to her isolation and pain. I've spent my adult life trying to ensure that others don't face those same barriers to getting help. He paused, looking around the room at faces that had become more than just guests. They were now collaborators in a shared mission. But I've realized that good intentions aren't enough. We need systematic change, cultural transformation, and the kind of influence that can only come from people like yourselves working together toward a common goal. The evening's central proposal emerged gradually through discussion rather than formal presentation. William and Catherine had developed a comprehensive plan for a global mental health initiative that would combine celebrity advocacy with cutting-edge research, policy change, and direct service provision. The initiative would establish mental health research centers in major cities worldwide, fund breakthrough treatment development, create public awareness campaigns that went beyond surface-level messaging, and work directly with governments to implement policy changes that would make mental health care more accessible and effective. But what made this proposal different from other celebrity-backed causes was its scope and commitment level. Participants wouldn't just be lending their names. They would be dedicating significant portions of their time, resources, and careers to making this work. Tom Holland was the first to commit fully. His youth and energy, combined with his massive global following, made him an ideal spokesperson for the initiative's work with young people. He would work directly with Dr. Chen's team to develop programs specifically designed for adolescents and young adults. Oprah's commitment involved leveraging her media empire to create content that would educate the public about mental health in ways that went far beyond typical awareness campaigns. She would also use her political connections to advocate for policy changes at the highest levels of government. Ryan Reynolds agreed to use his production company to create content that would normalize mental health conversations while maintaining the entertainment value that would reach broad audiences. His approach would focus on making mental health discussions accessible to people who might otherwise avoid the topic. Emma Thompson committed to working with Catherine on maternal mental health initiatives, combining her storytelling abilities with Catherine's research and policy interests. Their collaboration would focus on changing how society supports new mothers experiencing mental health challenges. Hugh Jackman would anchor the initiative's work in sports and fitness communities, partnering with Marcus to transform how athletic organizations approach mental health support for both professional and amateur athletes. As the evening moved toward its conclusion, the energy in the room had fundamentally shifted. These were no longer celebrities attending a charity event. They were founding members of what could become the most influential mental health organization in history. The practical details would be worked out in coming weeks, but the commitment was real and immediate. Each person present had agreed to dedicate the next 5 years of their career to this work, with the understanding that success would require sustained effort rather than short-term publicity campaigns. Dr. Chen would lead the scientific aspects of the initiative, ensuring that all public messaging and policy recommendations were based on the latest research evidence. Her role would be crucial in maintaining credibility and effectiveness as the initiative grew. The evening concluded with private conversations between William, Catherine, and each guest, finalizing individual commitments and beginning to outline specific timelines for implementation. The palace staff had been dismissed early, ensuring that these sensitive planning discussions remained completely private. As guests began to depart near midnight, the atmosphere was electric with possibility. They were all aware that they had just committed to something that would define the rest of their careers and potentially change millions of lives worldwide. The foundation had been laid not just for another celebrity cause, but for a genuine transformation in how the world approached mental health care. The real work would begin the next morning, but tonight had proven that the impossible might just be achievable when the right people came together with shared purpose and unwavering commitment. 3 weeks after the dinner at Kensington Palace, Emma Thompson found herself in a conference room at Cambridge University that felt worlds away from royal grandeur. The space was functional, filled with whiteboards covered in research diagrams and timelines that Dr. Sarah Chun had been developing for months before the palace gathering. What Emma hadn't realized during that elegant evening was that Prince William and Catherine had been planning this initiative for over 2 years. The dinner hadn't been the beginning. It had been the culmination of extensive research, strategic planning, and careful selection of the right people to make their vision reality. Dr. Chun stood at the front of the room, presenting findings that would form the scientific foundation of their work. Her research team had identified critical gaps in current mental health treatment that could be addressed through the combination of resources, influence, and coordination that their group could provide. Current mental health services reach approximately 30% of people who need them, Dr. Chun was saying, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had dedicated her career to understanding these issues. But, more importantly, current treatments are effective for only about 60% of people who do access care. We're failing the majority of people who need help, even when they can get it. Ryan Reynolds sat beside Emma, taking detailed notes in a way that would have surprised his fans. The man known for quick wit and improvised humor was approaching this project with the intensity of someone studying for the most important exam of his life. He had spent the 3 weeks since the dinner immersing himself in mental health research, reading academic papers, and talking to experts far beyond his usual Hollywood circles. The breakthrough potential lies in 3 areas, Dr. Chun continued. First, early intervention programs that can prevent mental health crises before they develop. Second, personalized treatment approaches based on genetic and neurological profiles. Third, community-based support systems that provide ongoing care rather than crisis response. Hugh Jackman raised his hand, a gesture that felt oddly formal in the academic setting. How does celebrity involvement actually move the needle on scientific research? I want to understand how we avoid just being poster children for work that would happen anyway. Dr. Chun smiled, clearly appreciating the directness of his question. Celebrity involvement changes everything, but not in the way most people think. Yes, you can raise money and awareness, but your real value is in accelerating adoption of new approaches and normalizing help-seeking behavior. She clicked to a new slide showing adoption curves for various medical innovations. When public figures share their experiences with mental health treatment, it doesn't just reduce stigma. It actually increases treatment compliance and effectiveness because people feel less shame about seeking help. Tom Holland had been quiet throughout the presentation, but now he leaned forward. What about young people specifically? The research you showed about developing brains. How does that change what we should be doing? Dr. Chin's expression grew more serious. This is where your involvement could literally save lives. Adolescent and young adult suicide rates have tripled in the past decade. Traditional mental health services aren't designed for developing minds, and young people aren't accessing care until they're in crisis. She pulled up research showing how social media and celebrity culture influenced young people's self-perception and help-seeking behavior. Tom, your influence with global youth populations could allow us to implement early intervention programs on a scale that's never been possible before. The presentation continued with detailed breakdowns of how each celebrity's platform could contribute to different aspects of the initiative. Oprah's media empire would be crucial for educating the public about new treatment approaches. Ryan's production capabilities could create content that reached people who would never seek traditional mental health information. Emma's dramatic abilities could help train healthcare providers in more effective communication techniques. But the scope of the plan went far beyond individual contributions. Catherine entered the room midway through the presentation, carrying documents that outline the policy and implementation framework that would support all of their public-facing work. "We've been working with health ministries in 12 countries," Catherine announced. Her tone indicating this was information that hadn't been shared before. The goal isn't just to raise awareness or fund research. We're planning to implement systematic changes in how mental health care is delivered worldwide. She distributed folders containing country-by-country analysis of current mental health systems, policy recommendations, and timelines for implementation. The documents revealed a level of preparation and governmental coordination that went far beyond typical celebrity advocacy. The United States has committed to pilot programs in 5 major cities, with federal funding contingent on our initiative's involvement, Catherine continued. Canada, Australia, and the UK have agreed to implement new early intervention protocols in their school systems. We have preliminary agreements with the European Union for research funding that exceeds current governmental mental health budgets. Emma flipped through the documents, increasingly amazed by the scope of what they were undertaking. This wasn't a charity or awareness campaign. It was a coordinated international effort to transform mental health care delivery on a global scale. Marcus Williams, the former footballer who had been quietly reviewing the materials, finally spoke up. "This is bigger than anything I imagined. How do we ensure we don't become the story instead of the cause?" Catherine nodded, clearly having anticipated this concern. "Everything we do publicly will be coordinated through a communications team that includes crisis management specialists, policy experts, and mental health professionals. Our goal is to stay focused on outcomes rather than publicity." She outlined a media strategy that was notably different from typical celebrity cause promotion. Instead of red carpet events and photo opportunities, their public engagement would consist primarily of educational content, policy discussions, and documentation of actual program results. Dr. Chen added, "We'll be publishing our research findings in peer-reviewed journals and presenting at academic conferences. The celebrity involvement will be transparent, but secondary to the scientific work." The room fell quiet as everyone absorbed the magnitude of what they were being asked to commit to. This would require years of dedicated effort, with success measured by actual changes in mental health outcomes rather than media coverage or fundraising totals. Oprah broke the silence with a question that cut to the heart of everyone's concerns. What happens if this doesn't work? What happens if we put all this effort and resources into something that doesn't actually improve people's lives? Prince William, who had been listening from the back of the room, stepped forward to answer. "Then we'll have failed in the most important work of our lives. But the current system is already failing millions of people. At least this way, we'll have tried everything possible." His words carried weight that went beyond his royal status. Everyone in the room knew that William's commitment to this work was deeply personal, rooted in his own family's struggles with mental health and the public scrutiny that had made those struggles more difficult. The meeting continued with detailed planning sessions that broke down into smaller working groups. Tom Holland and Dr. Chan focused on youth-oriented programs, developing specific interventions that could be implemented through schools and youth organizations worldwide. Emma Thompson and Catherine worked on maternal mental health initiatives, combining Emma's storytelling expertise with Catherine's policy knowledge to create programs that would support new mothers more effectively than current systems allowed. Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman collaborated on content creation strategies, planning entertainment, and sports programming that would normalize mental health conversations while maintaining the engagement value necessary to reach broad audiences. But perhaps the most crucial working group consisted of Oprah, Prince William, and a policy specialist who had joined them via video conference from the World Health Organization. Their focus was on creating the governmental and institutional partnerships that would allow their initiative to create systematic rather than superficial change. We need healthcare systems to adopt new approaches, not just awareness campaigns, the WHO representative was saying. That requires working within existing governmental and insurance structures, which means understanding policy implementation at levels most celebrity initiatives never engage with. The complexity was daunting, but so was the potential impact. If successful, their work could change how mental health care was delivered to hundreds of millions of people worldwide. As the day-long planning session concluded, each participant left with specific assignments and timelines. Tom would spend the next month visiting youth mental health facilities to understand current service gaps. Emma would work with maternal health experts to develop new support protocols. Ryan would begin developing content partnerships with streaming platforms and production companies. The most significant commitment came from Oprah, who announced that she would be dedicating her entire media platform to mental health content for the next 2 years. This represented a business decision worth millions of dollars, demonstrating the depth of commitment the initiative required. Dr. Chen would coordinate the scientific aspects while beginning recruitment of research teams in major cities worldwide. Catherine would handle governmental negotiations and policy development. Prince William would manage overall strategy and serve as the initiative's public face when royal involvement was appropriate. The meeting ended with a sobering reminder from Dr. Chen about the timeline they were working within. Current projections suggest that without major intervention, youth suicide rates will double again within the next decade. We don't have the luxury of slow development or cautious implementation. As they prepared to leave Cambridge, the magnitude of their commitment was clear to everyone involved. They had moved far beyond the elegant dinner party atmosphere of their first gathering into the complex reality of trying to change global healthcare systems. But they had also seen the detailed planning and governmental support that made their ambitious goals potentially achievable. This wasn't just celebrity goodwill. It was a carefully orchestrated effort to address one of the most pressing health crises of their time. The real work was about to begin, with each person returning to their regular lives while simultaneously launching the most important project of their careers. Success would require balancing their existing professional obligations with the intensive demands of transforming mental health care worldwide. 3 weeks earlier, they had been dinner guests at a royal gathering. Now, they were partners in an undertaking that could define their legacies and potentially save millions of lives. The transition from elegant conversation to serious implementation work had been rapid and irreversible. As Emma Thompson drove away from Cambridge, she realized that regardless of the outcome, her life had been permanently changed by these commitments. She was no longer just an actress who supported mental health causes. She was now responsible for helping to redesign how society cared for people experiencing psychological distress. The weight of that responsibility was both terrifying and energizing. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. 6 months after the Cambridge planning session, Tom Holland found himself in a Seattle high school at 7 in the morning, watching Dr. Chen conduct focus groups with teenagers who had volunteered to test their new mental health intervention app. The contrast between this environment and his usual film sets was striking, but Tom had discovered that this work energized him in ways that acting never had. The app they were testing represented months of collaboration between technology developers, mental health researchers, and the celebrity advocates. Unlike existing mental health apps that focus primarily on meditation or mood tracking, this platform used artificial intelligence to provide personalized interventions based on user behavior patterns and evidence-based therapeutic techniques. The key insight, Dr. Chen had explained during one of their development sessions, is that most people experiencing mental health challenges don't recognize the early warning signs. By the time they seek help, they're often in crisis. But patterns of behavior change weeks or months before someone reaches that point. Tom watched as teenagers interacted with the app, providing feedback that would inform the final design. What struck him most was how naturally these young people discussed mental health concepts that had taken him years to understand and accept about his own experience. "It's weird," one 16-year-old girl was saying, "but knowing that Spider-Man dealt with anxiety makes it feel less like there's something wrong with me. Like if he could be a superhero and still have panic attacks, maybe I can handle school and still sometimes feel overwhelmed." The comment hit Tom harder than he had expected. When he had first shared his anxiety struggles publicly as part of the initiative, he had focused on the potential policy impacts and awareness benefits. He hadn't fully considered how his personal revelations might affect individual young people on such a direct level. Dr. Chen caught his expression and nodded slightly. They had discussed this phenomenon extensively, how celebrity disclosure could create permission for others to acknowledge their own struggles and seek help. But seeing it in action was different from understanding it theoretically. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in New York, Oprah was discovering the complex realities of transforming media coverage of mental health issues. Her commitment to dedicating her platform to mental health content had seemed straightforward during their planning meetings, but implementation had proven more challenging than anyone had anticipated. The issue wasn't audience interest. Viewers were responding enthusiastically to the deeper, more educational approach to mental health content. The challenge was balancing entertainment value with scientific accuracy while avoiding the sensationalism that typically characterized media coverage of psychological issues. Oprah sat in her production office, reviewing footage from a recent interview with a family whose teenage son had attempted suicide. The interview was powerful and educational, but it also contained details that could potentially trigger vulnerable viewers or inadvertently provide information that could be harmful if misinterpreted. Her production team had developed new protocols for mental health content, including consultations with Dr. Chen's team before airing any program that discussed specific treatment approaches or personal mental health stories. The process was more complex and time-consuming than traditional talk show production, but it was necessary to ensure their content helped rather than harm viewers. "We're essentially creating a new genre of television," Oprah told her lead producer during one of their weekly planning meetings. "Educational entertainment that can actually improve mental health outcomes rather than just discussing them." The approach was working, but it required constant vigilance. Every program now included specific resource information and follow-up support options for viewers who might be struggling with similar issues. They had partnered with crisis hotlines to ensure adequate staffing during and after programs that might prompt people to seek help. In London, Emma Thompson was facing different but equally complex challenges in her work on maternal mental health initiatives. She had spent months working with Catherine to develop new support protocols for new mothers, but implementing these approaches within existing healthcare systems had proven more difficult than anticipated. The medical community had been surprisingly resistant to changes in postpartum care protocols, even when research clearly demonstrated the effectiveness of new approaches. Many healthcare providers were hesitant to adopt methods that required additional time or training, especially when current systems were already overwhelmed. Emma found herself using skills she had never expected to need as an actress: negotiating with hospital administrators, presenting research findings to medical boards, and advocating for policy changes with insurance companies. The work was frustrating but crucial, as she had learned that maternal mental health issues affected not just mothers but had long-term impacts on child development and family stability. "The resistance isn't coming from lack of concern," Catherine explained during one of their strategy sessions. "Healthcare systems are overwhelmed and under-resourced. Adding new protocols, even beneficial ones, feels threatening when providers are already struggling to meet basic care requirements." Their solution had been to pilot their new approaches in selected hospitals where administrators were willing to test innovative methods. The goal was to demonstrate clear improvements in patient outcomes that would encourage broader adoption of their protocols. Ryan Reynolds was discovering similar implementation challenges in his content creation work. His production company had developed several projects designed to normalize mental health conversations through entertainment. But getting these projects funded and distributed required navigating an industry that was often risk-averse when it came to serious topics. Everyone wants to support mental health awareness in theory, Ryan explained to Hugh Jackman during one of their regular check-in calls. But when it comes to actually investing money in content that addresses these issues directly, suddenly there are concerns about audience appeal and commercial viability. Ryan had learned to frame their projects in terms of market research, showing growing audience appetite for authentic content that addressed real-life challenges. Younger demographics, particularly, were seeking entertainment that reflected their own experiences with mental health struggles rather than avoiding or stigmatizing these topics. He was facing parallel challenges in his work with sports organizations. Despite growing awareness of athlete mental health issues, many sports institutions remained resistant to implementing comprehensive support programs. The culture of athletic competition often conflicted with acknowledgement of psychological vulnerability. There's still this belief that mental toughness means not needing help, Hugh told their weekly coordination call. We're trying to reframe mental health support as performance enhancement rather than weakness acknowledgement, but it's slow progress. Marcus Williams, the former footballer, had proven invaluable in this work. His credibility within sports communities allowed him to have conversations that might not have been possible for Hugh alone. Together, they were developing programs that integrated mental health support into standard athletic training protocols. The most significant breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Chin's research team had developed new neurological assessment techniques that could predict mental health vulnerabilities before symptoms appeared. The technology was groundbreaking, but it also raised ethical questions about privacy and potential discrimination. If we can identify someone's likelihood of developing depression or anxiety before they experience symptoms, what obligation do we have to intervene? Dr. Chin posed this question during one of their monthly video conferences. And who should have access to that information? The question had implications far beyond their initiative. Insurance companies, employers, and educational institutions would all be interested in accessing predictive mental health information. The potential for discrimination was significant, but so was the potential for prevention. Prince William had been working with legal experts and ethicists to develop frameworks for the responsible use of predictive mental health technology. The work was complex, involving consultation with privacy advocates, disability rights organizations, and mental health professionals. We have the opportunity to prevent mental health crises before they occur, William explained during a presentation to European Union health ministers. But we must ensure that prediction doesn't become persecution. The policy work was proving as challenging as the scientific and implementation efforts. Each country had different legal frameworks governing mental health information, medical privacy, and healthcare delivery. Creating coordinated international approaches required navigating complex regulatory environments. Catherine had taken the lead on policy coordination, working with government officials worldwide to develop consistent approaches that would allow their research and programs to be implemented effectively across different healthcare systems. The science is advancing faster than policy frameworks can accommodate, Catherine explained to Emma during one of their working sessions. We're having to help create the legal and regulatory infrastructure that will support the innovations we're developing. 1 year after their initial dinner at Kensington Palace, the group reconvened to assess their progress and address the challenges they had encountered. The meeting took place at Oxford University in a setting that reflected how much their work had evolved from celebrity advocacy to serious academic and policy development. Dr. Chun presented outcome data from their pilot programs, showing measurable improvements in early intervention effectiveness and treatment compliance. The numbers were encouraging, but they also highlighted how much work remained to be done to achieve their ambitious goals. We've demonstrated that integrated celebrity advocacy and scientific research can accelerate mental health innovation, Dr. Chen reported. But scaling these approaches to population levels will require overcoming institutional resistance and resource limitations that are greater than we initially anticipated. Tom Holland had documented his year of work in schools and youth organizations, creating a presentation that surprised everyone with its depth and sophistication. His natural charisma had evolved into genuine expertise in youth mental health issues. What I've learned, Tom told the group, is that young people are ready for these conversations in ways that adults often aren't. The barriers aren't coming from the people we're trying to help. They're coming from systems that haven't adapted to new approaches. The meeting continued with detailed analysis of what had worked, what had failed, and what needed to be modified for their second year of implementation. The challenges were significant, but so were the early successes that proved their approach could work when properly supported. Oprah had perhaps the most encouraging news. Her mental health programming had generated the highest audience engagement ratings of her career, while also producing measurable increases in help-seeking behavior among viewers. "People want this content," she reported. "We just need to make sure other media outlets understand that addressing mental health issues seriously can be both socially responsible and commercially successful." As they planned their second year of work, the scope of their initiative continued to expand. What had begun as a dinner conversation had evolved into an international effort involving dozens of researchers, policymakers, and healthcare providers across multiple continents. The challenges were greater than any of them had anticipated, but so were the potential rewards. They were no longer just celebrities supporting a cause. They had become leaders in a movement that was genuinely changing how society approached mental health care. The second year would require even greater commitment and more sophisticated approaches to the complex problems they were trying to solve. But they had also proven that their collaboration could generate innovations and policy changes that would have been impossible through traditional approaches. As they left Oxford, each participant carried detailed plans for expanding their work while addressing the barriers they had encountered. The elegant dinner party atmosphere of their first meeting had been replaced by the serious urgency of people who understood they were engaged in work that could literally save millions of lives. The transformation from celebrities to mental health innovators was complete, but the hardest work still lay ahead. 2 years after that transformative dinner at Kensington Palace, Emma Thompson stood before the United Nations General Assembly, preparing to deliver a speech that would mark the global adoption of mental health protocols developed through their initiative. The journey from elegant royal dinner to international policy implementation had been more challenging than anyone could have predicted, but the results spoke for themselves. The numbers were staggering. Their early intervention programs had reduced youth suicide rates by 37% in pilot cities. Their maternal mental health protocols had decreased postpartum depression complications by 52%. Most significantly, their predictive assessment technology had prevented an estimated 15,000 mental health crises before they occurred. But Emma knew that statistics only told part of the story. As she looked out at delegates from 193 countries, she thought about the individuals whose lives had been changed by their work. Young people like Sarah, a 17-year-old from Manchester whose depression had been identified and treated before she ever experienced a crisis. Mothers like Maria, whose postpartum anxiety had been addressed immediately after delivery rather than months later when intervention was more difficult. Mental health is not a luxury concern for wealthy nations, Emma began her address. It is a fundamental human right that affects every aspect of human development, economic productivity, and social stability. What we have learned over the past 2 years is that mental health care can be transformed when we combine scientific innovation with coordinated global action. In the audience, Tom Holland listened with pride and amazement at how far they had all come. His own transformation from actor to mental health advocate had been profound and unexpected. What had started as lending his name to a cause had evolved into genuine expertise in adolescent psychology and youth intervention programs. Tom's work with Dr. Chun had revolutionized how schools approached student mental health. Their app, now used in over 10,000 schools worldwide, had become the gold standard for early intervention technology. More importantly, Tom had helped change how young people talked about mental health, normalizing help-seeking behavior in ways that previous campaigns had never achieved. His social media presence had evolved from entertainment promotion to sophisticated mental health education. His posts about anxiety, depression, and treatment options regularly reached over 50 million young people worldwide, creating a global conversation about mental wellness that transcended cultural and linguistic barriers. But Tom's greatest pride came from the letters he received from young people whose lives had been changed by the initiative's work. Like Jamie, a 15-year-old from rural Australia who had been connected to mental health services through their school-based screening program before his depression became severe enough to require hospitalization. Ryan Reynolds had experienced his own profound transformation through the initiative's work. His production company had become a leader in creating content that addressed mental health issues with both entertainment value and scientific accuracy. His streaming series about a therapist working with first responders had not only been critically acclaimed, but had also led to policy changes in how emergency services provided mental health support to their employees. The entertainment industry has a responsibility that we're just beginning to understand, Ryan had told a conference of media executives the previous month. We can either perpetuate harmful stereotypes about mental health, or we can use our platforms to educate and heal. The choice is ours, but the impact affects millions of people. Ryan's approach had proven that audiences were hungry for authentic content that addressed real-life mental health challenges. His projects consistently performed well commercially, while also generating measurable improvements in public attitudes toward mental health treatment. Perhaps more importantly, Ryan had become a model for other entertainment figures who wanted to use their platforms responsibly. His production company now consulted with other studios on how to integrate mental health awareness into mainstream entertainment without sacrificing commercial appeal. Oprah's contribution to the initiative had been equally transformative, but in different ways. Her commitment to dedicating her media empire to mental health content had created a new standard for how media could address psychological issues. Her programs consistently combined compelling storytelling with rigorous scientific accuracy, creating content that was both engaging and genuinely helpful to viewers struggling with mental health challenges. Her interview series with people who had recovered from severe mental illness had become required viewing in many medical schools, providing future healthcare providers with insights into patient experiences that traditional training couldn't offer. Her policy discussions with world leaders had influenced mental health legislation in dozens of countries. But Oprah's most significant impact had been in changing how other media outlets approached mental health coverage. Her success had proven that serious, educational content about psychological issues could generate higher ratings than sensationalized coverage, leading to industry-wide changes in how mental health stories were reported. Hugh Jackman and Marcus Williams had revolutionized mental health support in sports, creating programs that have been adopted by professional leagues worldwide. Their approach, which integrated mental health support into standard athletic training, had reduced athlete suicide rates and improved overall performance outcomes. We've learned that mental health support isn't just about helping athletes when they're struggling, Hugh explained to the International Olympic Committee. It's about optimizing performance by ensuring that psychological wellness is maintained at the same level as physical fitness. Their work had extended beyond professional sports into youth athletics, creating early intervention programs that identified young athletes at risk for mental health challenges before competitive pressures became overwhelming. Dr. Chun had become one of the most influential neuroscientists in the world through her work with the initiative. Her research on predictive mental health assessment had opened entirely new fields of study, while her collaboration with celebrities had demonstrated how public advocacy could accelerate scientific advancement. Her team had published over 100 peer-reviewed papers based on research conducted through the initiative, creating scientific foundations for policy changes that had been implemented in over 40 countries. More importantly, her work had led to the development of treatment approaches that were significantly more effective than previous methods. The integration of celebrity advocacy with rigorous scientific research has created possibilities that neither approach could have achieved alone, Dr. Chun told the World Health Assembly. We've demonstrated that public influence and scientific innovation can work together to solve complex healthcare challenges. Prince William and Catherine had emerged as global leaders in mental health policy, working with governments worldwide to implement systematic changes in healthcare delivery. Their royal status had provided access to political leaders that had accelerated policy adoption in ways that would have taken decades through traditional advocacy channels. Catherine's work on maternal mental health had led to policy changes that were projected to improve outcomes for over 10 million new mothers annually. Her research on early childhood development had influenced education policy in dozens of countries, creating support systems that would benefit children for generations. William's advocacy had been crucial in securing international funding for mental health research and services. His ability to convene world leaders had created unprecedented coordination in global mental health policy, establishing frameworks for continued collaboration long after their initial initiative concluded. As Emma concluded her UN speech, she reflected on how completely their lives had been changed by their commitment to this work. None of them had anticipated the depth of dedication that would be required, or the profound personal transformation that would result from their involvement. What we have accomplished over the past 2 years proves that mental health care can be transformed when we combine celebrity influence with scientific innovation and political coordination, Emma told the assembled delegates. But our work is far from finished. The systems we have created must now be sustained and expanded to reach every person who needs support. The UN vote that followed was unanimous. All member nations committed to implementing the mental health protocols developed through their initiative. It was a historic moment that represented the culmination of 2 years of intense collaboration between celebrities, scientists, policymakers, and healthcare providers. But as the applause filled the General Assembly hall, Emma knew that this moment was not an ending, but a beginning. The infrastructure they had created would continue growing and evolving, reaching people they would never meet, but whose lives would be improved by the work they had done together. Tom Holland felt a similar sense of continuing responsibility as he prepared to launch the next phase of his mental health advocacy. His commitment to the initiative had taught him that celebrity influence carried obligations that extended far beyond entertainment. He had discovered a purpose that would define the rest of his career. Ryan Reynolds was already developing new projects that would build on the foundation they had established. His production company had become a model for how entertainment companies could contribute to social causes while maintaining commercial success. He was committed to proving that doing good and doing well were not mutually exclusive. Oprah's media empire would continue focusing on mental health content, but she was also expanding into direct service provision, using her resources to fund treatment centers and research programs that would continue the initiative's work for decades to come. Hugh Jackman had committed to spending the next decade transforming mental health support in sports, working with athletic organizations worldwide to implement the programs they had developed. His work would ensure that future generations of athletes would have access to mental health support that previous generations had never received. Dr. Chun would continue leading the scientific aspects of the work, but she was also training the next generation of researchers who would carry forward the innovative approaches they had developed. Her laboratory had become a global center for mental health research that combined scientific rigor with public health impact. Prince William and Catherine would continue their policy work while also establishing a foundation that would provide ongoing coordination for international mental health initiatives. Their royal platform would remain dedicated to mental health advocacy for the rest of their lives. As the delegates filed out of the General Assembly, conversations continued about implementation strategies and national adaptations of the protocols they had developed. The work was transitioning from innovation to institutionalization, ensuring that their approaches would become standard practice rather than experimental programs. Emma walked through the UN corridors, still amazed by the journey that had brought her from that elegant dinner party to this moment of global policy adoption. She thought about all the people whose lives had already been changed by their work, and all those who would benefit from the systems they had created in the years and decades to come. The transformation from celebrities to mental health innovators had required sacrifices and commitments none of them had fully anticipated. They had given up significant portions of their careers, invested their own resources, and taken on responsibilities that would last for the rest of their lives. But as Emma emerged from the UN building into the New York afternoon, she knew that their work had achieved something extraordinary. They had proven that celebrity influence, when combined with scientific rigor and political coordination, could create changes in global healthcare systems that would benefit millions of people for generations. The elegant dinner party at Kensington Palace had been just the beginning. What they had built together would continue growing and evolving long after all of them were gone, creating a legacy of improved mental health care that would be their greatest contribution to the world. The conversation that had started with concern about mental health stigma had evolved into systematic changes in global healthcare delivery. What had begun as celebrity advocacy had become a new model for how public figures could use their influence to solve complex social problems. As Emma headed home, she carried with her the satisfaction of knowing that their work had created lasting change that would improve millions of lives. But she also carried the ongoing responsibility of ensuring that the systems they had created would continue to grow and reach every person who needed help. The work was far from finished, but the foundation had been laid for continued progress that would extend their impact far beyond anything they could have imagined during that first evening at Kensington Palace. Their legacy would be measured not in entertainment achievements, but in the countless lives that would be saved and improved by the mental health care transformation they had created together. The dinner party had ended, but the mission would continue forever.